She called me a cheater in front of the entire class. I was silent. 2 decades later, she approached me at an alumni fundraiser. "We need a significant donation from a success story like you," she pleaded. I just looked at her. "Sorry," I said. "My money doesn't associate with people who have questionable character. You know how some memories are fuzzy, and others are burned into your brain with perfect, high-definition clarity. This one is the second kind." I'm 12 years old, sitting in my 6th grade classroom, and it's dead silent. The only sounds are the scratching of pencils on paper and the slow, methodical tick of the clock on the wall. We were in the middle of a big social studies exam, and I was in the zone. I was a good student, not for any reason other than I genuinely liked getting A's. It felt like winning a video game. Then, the sound started. From the desk to my left, pop. It was sharp, like someone snapping a tiny twig right next to my ear. I tried to ignore it. A few seconds later, pop, pop, pop. It was Carla. She was methodically going through each of her knuckles, one by one. The sound was like a nail scraping down the chalkboard of my concentration. My brain, which had been neatly organizing facts about ancient civilizations, was now just a loop of pop, pop, pop. My first thought wasn't anger. It was just pure, unfiltered annoyance. "Seriously, can you not do that right now?" I tried to signal her with my mind. "Stop, please stop." But the popping continued. I couldn't take it anymore. Without really thinking, I just flicked my eyes over to her, gave her the quickest, most irritated frown a 12-year-old could muster, and then immediately looked back at my paper. The whole thing couldn't have taken more than a second and a half, but it was long enough. I felt a shadow fall over my desk. I looked up and my teacher, Mrs. Davison, was standing right over me. Her arms were crossed, and her expression was a mix of disappointment and stern accusation that could curdle milk. "Is there something on Carla's paper you find so interesting?" she asked. Her voice wasn't a whisper. It was a carrying, classroom-filling statement. Every pencil stopped scratching. Every head turned. I could feel 30 pairs of eyes on me, and my face went from normal to scorching hot in a nanosecond. My brain just short-circuited. What was I supposed to say? No. I was just giving her a dirty look because she sounds like a bag of popping popcorn. No, I stammered. She was cracking her knuckles. Mrs. Davison's lips thinned into a straight line. She wasn't buying it. Not for a second. "Bring your paper to my desk. Now." The finality in her voice was like a judge's gavel. She took my test, scribbled something on it I couldn't see, and told me to sit back down and wait until the bell rang. I just sat there, staring at the wood grain of my empty desk. I replayed that 1-second glance over and over. It was such a small, insignificant thing, but in her eyes, it had transformed me from a good student into a liar and a cheat. The verdict was in, and I never even got to present my case. Read it. I'm a grown man now, but I can still feel the heat of that blush. How are you supposed to defend yourself when you're 12 and the adult in charge has already decided you're guilty? What do you even say? The worst part wasn't the accusation itself, but the silence that followed. In the days and weeks after the exam, Mrs. Davison never mentioned it again, but she didn't have to. Her entire demeanor toward me had shifted. Before, I was one of the students she'd banter with. Now, she'd look right through me. If I raised my hand to ask a question, her eyes would scan past me, picking 2 or 3 other kids first. When she finally called on me, her response was always clipped and brief. It was a cold, quiet form of punishment, and it was brutal. I felt like I was wearing a sign that said dishonest, and she was the only one who could see it. I started double-checking my work, not because I was afraid of getting it wrong, but because I was terrified of giving her any reason to think I hadn't done it myself. Then, a few months later, an announcement was made. The school was forming a special internet investigation team. This sounds ancient now, but back then, getting the internet in a school was a huge deal. The team would be a small group of students and faculty tasked with researching the pros and cons and presenting their findings to the school board. My mind immediately latched onto it. This is my chance, I thought. What better way to prove I was a serious, forward-thinking, and trustworthy student than to be on a committee like this? It wasn't about grades. It was about responsibility. It was my path to redemption. I wrote a whole essay for the application and got in. I walked into the first meeting, held in a stuffy corner of the school library, feeling a surge of pride. This was it. A fresh start. The other 2 students were already there. And then, the faculty advisor walked in and sat down at the head of the small table. It was Mrs. Davison. My stomach just dropped. Of all the teachers in the entire school, it had to be her. I felt like I'd meticulously planned a prison break only to tunnel directly into the warden's office. My first instinct was to just get up and leave. But then another thought stopped me cold. If you leave, it proves she was right about you. So I stayed. I was trapped. Those meetings were a masterclass in awkwardness. There were only 4 of us in that room, so there was no place to hide. I would present my research on modem speeds or the dangers of chat rooms, and I would do it by staring at a point on the wall just over her left shoulder. I could feel her eyes on me, scrutinizing every word. She was professional, I'll give her that. She never brought up the exam, but her praise was faint and her questions always seemed to have a slight edge to them, as if she was probing for a weakness in my argument. The air was so thick with our unspoken history that I'm surprised we didn't all suffocate. I was working twice as hard as everyone else, not just to get the school and internet connection, but to convince this one woman that I wasn't the person she thought I was. It felt like I was on trial for months. Has anyone else been stuck in a situation like that, where you have to work closely with someone who has completely misjudged you? How do you even act in a situation like that? It's been 24 years since I sat at that desk, feeling the heat of 100 eyeballs on me. The internet investigation team eventually made its recommendation. The school got its dial-up connection, and I never had a class with Mrs. Davison again. You'd think the memory would just fade. Another dumb story from middle school, but it didn't. It stuck to me like tar. That feeling of being unfairly judged, of having my character smeared in public, it lit a fire in me, but it wasn't a healthy, motivational fire. It was a panicked, frantic fire, the kind that makes you run. I realized that the only way to protect myself was to build an armor of achievement so thick and shiny that no one could ever question my integrity again. Every test became a battleground. Every A wasn't just a grade, it was another brick in my fortress. I stayed up late, studied obsessively, and joined every academic club I could. I needed my record to be flawless, a perfect, unassailable document that screamed, I am not a cheater. And it worked. 6 years later, I stood on a stage in a cap and gown and gave the valedictorian speech to my graduating class of about 560 students. In that moment, holding that plaque, I felt a flicker of vindication, but looking back, I have to wonder what it cost. That drive wasn't born from a love of learning, it was born from a fear of being misjudged. What kills me is that not all teachers were like her. My art teacher, Mr. Jensen, was the complete opposite. He was this cool, laid-back guy who taught us how to throw pottery and listen to classic rock in the classroom. He was also part of a car club that my parents were in. On weekends, I'd see him at car shows, and he wouldn't be Mr. Jensen, the teacher. He'd be Dave, the guy who's rebuilding a '68 Camaro. Had talked to me about carburetors and paint jobs. He saw me as a whole person, not just a student sitting in a numbered seat. He knew who I was. Mrs. Davison saw a potential crime. That's the difference. 12-year-olds are impressionable. One teacher made me feel seen, the other made me feel scrutinized. I've recovered. Obviously, I'm a functioning adult with a good life, but the scar is still there. Even now, if a boss or a client questions my work, a tiny part of my brain flashes back to that classroom. There's a ghost inside me that's still that 12-year-old kid, desperate to prove he's telling the truth. And here's the kicker. The part that is so fundamentally absurd it's almost funny. The one detail that invalidates the entire incident. Carla, the girl I supposedly cheated off of, I wasn't friends with her, but everyone knew her. She was a nice enough person, but academically, she was an underachiever, coasting by with C's. So let me just put this plainly, if I was going to abandon my morals, risk my reputation, and cheat on a damn 6th grade social studies test, it sure as hell wouldn't have been off Carla's paper. You damaged my psyche. Mrs. 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 Davison, over an accusation that didn't even make logical sense. Does anyone else have one of these stories? A moment from your childhood that makes zero sense but still follows you around decades later.